Hello viewers, I think therefore I am, famously remarked the 17th century French philosopher Descartes. His purpose was to show that it is thought and not matter which is the basis of all existence. We will not go into the debate of whether thought is primary or matter is primary. However, it cannot be denied that thought largely determines how individuals and societies act. Thinking is traditionally divided into deductive thinking and inductive thinking. In deductive thinking, conclusions are drawn from premises which are assumed to be true. For example, take the most famous example of a deductive argument. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Now, if you accept both these premises, then the inevitable conclusion is that Socrates is mortal. So that is how deductive arguments work. Take some other examples. Now take two premises. Number one, all those who do not believe in God do not deserve a high position in government. Atheists and agnostics do not believe in God. So on the basis of these two premises, if you assume them to be true, then the inevitable conclusion is that atheists and agnostics do not deserve a high position in government. So if anyone accept these two arguments, then they have also got to accept the conclusion that atheists and agnostics do not deserve a high position in the government. Likewise, take another argument. Only democracy have the right to make nuclear weapons. China is not a democracy. Again, these are the two prepositions, two assumptions, and on the basis of these two assumptions, if you accept these assumptions to be true, then the inevitable conclusion is that China doesn't have the right to make nuclear weapons, or it is only a country which is democratic who has the right to make nuclear weapons. On the other hand, inductive thinking or inductive argument consists in formulating a principle on the basis of particular instances observed. For example, is there any relationship between development and democracy? Is development to take place, there must be a democratic form of government? Let's see. Western societies, we all know, developed on back of democracy. So these are a few instances which support this conclusion. Then there are instances which do not support this conclusion, like China and Singapore, which have developed economically on the back of authoritarianism. Both have authoritarian governments. So if we consider both these premises, then the inevitable conclusion is that democracy is not necessary for development. So you see the difference between inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. In deductive reasoning, there are premises which are assumed to be true and then a conclusion is drawn. Whereas in inductive reasoning, a conclusion is drawn on the basis of instances that are observed. Deductive thinking, now it must be clear to you, is used to protect or defend well established beliefs, practices, and institutions. Generally, these beliefs and institutions have religious foundations, but there can also be secular institutions like the institution of monarchy, one of the oldest and strongest institution, which has been defended in the long history through deductive reasoning. Likewise, there was a view until the early modern period that Earth is in the center of the universe and the sun and other stars or planets revolve around the earth, which was called the geocentric view. So this view also did not have any scientific basis, rather it had a deductive basis or a sort of religious basis. You must be aware with the principle lis majeste, which means there should not be any disrespect of the king or the ruler. This principle is still strongly applied as part of the constitution of Thailand. And sometimes this principle is also invoked to defend the idea of the contempt of court. You cannot hold any court in contempt. So this also are examples of deductive reasoning, because it is assumed that certain institutions, whether it's the institution of the king, monarchy, presidency, parliament, or that of the judiciary, they are beyond criticism, and if you criticize them, you are guilty of contempt. Likewise, in particularly in South Asian countries, dynastic politics has been a very strong influence, and the strong presence of domestic politics, particularly in India and Pakistan, have much to do with deductive thinking, because there has long been a belief that a particular family can steer the country forward, and as long as this country governs, the country is in safe hands. If you are liking this video, kindly subscribe to my channel Wisdom of Life. Inductive thinking is essentially critical thinking, and it is used to question well-established beliefs, practices, and institutions. All the revolutions that have come in the world, including the French, Russian, Chinese, and Iranian revolution, they had inductive foundations because they challenged the existing authority. It is another thing that after some time, the post-revolutionary regime also used deductive thinking to defend itself, but in the beginning, they used inductive reasoning to justify their struggle because they questioned the authority. Scientific theories like the heliocentric view of the universe, that Earth is not in the center, rather it revolves around the sun, and Darwin's evolutionary theory, which questioned and to many exploited the belief in creation, are also examples of inductive thinking. Likewise, there are movements all over the world for more freedom of expression and not to treat any institution as sacred or beyond criticism. In South Asia, we have examples of Narendra Modi and Imran Khan, both of whom successfully challenged dynastic politics by invoking inductive reasoning. However, they themselves later started using deductive reasoning, or use of religious symbols to defend themselves. Modi is still Indian Prime Minister, while Imran Khan, the former Prime Minister, is in prison, but both used religious symbols to justify their regime, that is, they used deductive reasoning. Deductive thinking underlies religion and myth. Inductive thinking lies at the root of science. Now, deductive thinking is dominant mode of thought in every society. Whether it's a primitive society or a modern society, contemporary society, whether it's a liberal society or a conservative society, whether it's a democratic society or an authoritarian society, and whether it's a religious society or a secular society. Now, why deductive thinking is so pervasive? The reason is that every society has some fundamental beliefs which it is keen, if not desperate, to protect. Most of these beliefs are religious beliefs. However, there can also be non-religious beliefs, like, for example, in Western countries, there is creed-like devotion to market economy. And in communist countries like China, again, there is creed-like devotion to the powers of the Communist Party. So these are also the examples of secular institutions showing creed-like devotion and thus exhibiting deductive thinking. And there is no society in which delinquents, however they are defined, are looked upon with approval. If you break the law, if you break the social values, you are then not treated well. However, on balance, liberal secular societies tend to be more proficient in inductive thinking than conservative religious societies. Now we will look into the factors which affect inductive thinking. The most important factor is education. However, only that education that inculcates a spirit of inquiry and skepticism among the students, the type of education that makes students question. If education takes the form of indoctrination, then it is lethal to inductive thinking. A very good example of education based on indoctrination is the system of religious seminaries or madaras in Muslim countries. And we also know a strong link between madaras and religious extremism because of the particular mode of thinking, the deductive mode of thinking, which is preached in madaras. Thinking or the mode of thinking is also linked to social class. Generally, lower and upper classes think deductively, while middle class tend to think more inductively. The reason is that the upper class is keen to preserve the status quo, and therefore they use deductive thinking to define the things as they are. The lower class is so much occupied with meeting the basic needs that they cannot afford the luxury of inductive thinking, leaving thus middle class in any society as the torchbearer of inductive thinking. Factors like opportunity for higher education, some measure of economic security, desire for upward social mobility, and some grievances against the system encourage the middle class to think inductively. The role of the media in promoting one type of thinking or the other type of thinking is also important. Media which are wedded to a particular ideology, system, or party preach at best half truths. Corporate media, which is committed only to profit, construct truths that can be sold. So it is interested in profiting, not in presenting truths. While media which just aim to entertain or allow viewers to kill time are not at all interested in truth. The role of the political system is also very important. On balance, democracy are more open to inductive thinking than dictatorships. Society and culture is also important. Some societies are tolerant society which promote inductive thinking, while societies like many current present day Muslim societies, they inhibit inductive thinking. In such societies, non-conformists are branded as heretics, traitors, or wicked. And there are some societies where there is focus on uncritical acceptance of authority, and that authority may be the authority of the priest, Brahman, or the mullah. However, secular factor or secular leadership can also be the basis of authoritarianism, as we saw in Hitler's Germany, Stalin's Russia, and presently we are seeing in present day China. A classic example of an authoritarian society was medieval Europe, and most of the contemporary Muslim societies, if not all, are also examples of intolerant authoritarian societies. Therefore, such societies produce Al Qaeda and Daesh like organizations. The present day Taliban regime in Afghanistan is also a big example, a prominent example of authoritarianism, uncritical acceptance of authority, and intolerance in the name of religion. I trust you like this video. Please subscribe to my channel, Wisdom of Life. Thanks for your time.